Welcome to Tilting Your Online Assignments, another in our webinar series. I'm here with my colleagues, Jesse Bishop from Georgia Highlands, Jordan Kofer from Georgia College, Rod McRae from West Georgia, and Marina Smitherman from Dalton State, though she is currently traveling and not even in our time zone. So we thank her for coming. And interestingly, so we five have been doing Tilt together for over 3 years now. And Cher Hendricks is here, who was on the original Tilt team, so we're happy that she's made a guest appearance here. So we've presented to well over 1,500 faculty at this point, both in the state and beyond. So we're excited to share this with you this morning. But before we begin, we wanted to just collectively acknowledge our position of privilege. So you saw that picture of us at the beginning, the first slide, or you can see us here in the gallery. We are 5 shades of white here, but Tilt is all about equity. And we acknowledge that as we talk about equity and talk about promoting diversity and inclusion and changing systemic barriers, that we also realize that we don't have the experience to walk in those shoes. So in the words of Bell Hooks, we hope that our work reflects our joy in cultural diversity, our passion for justice, and our love of freedom. So looking in the chat, and you guys can see this, we're seeing a lot of really great reasons that you guys are coming to this session. And if we look at our objectives, hopefully we will meet those for the reason you came. So we're going to start with what is Tilt and why should we care about it? How to actually tilt an assignment, how to make your assignment transparent. We're going to look at an example of a before and after pre and post tilted assignment and talk about, you know, as with our classes, as with everything we do, it's never the end. It's always a work in progress, but we can always continue to improve. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to do this online.
So what is Tilt and why does it matter? Why have you chosen today to join us? And this was something that Denise said we've been working on together as a team for about 3 years. And Cher, who's joined us today, and I were at a conference and heard a lady called Winkelmes talking about a project where they looked at a very large number of different aspects of assignment design with a very large number of students, and identified key aspects of that assignment design that helped everyone achieve regardless of their background. And we got really excited because we felt like this had the potential to really help us with our students in Georgia. And so TILT is actually, if you haven't come across the acronym before, it stands for Transparency in Learning and Teaching. You know, and for us, the reason that it's important, you know, as discipline, you know, content discipline experts, it's often very, very difficult for us to take that step back. You know, when we look at something new within the area, it's very easy for us to associate it with something we already knew, to process it, because we've got existing neural networks that we have put together as we've studied. And so it's really hard for us, having reached the pinnacle with a terminal degree in our field, to take that step back. And something that we may feel is perfectly clear because we understand it so well may not be for a student who hasn't developed those neural networks and is still working on developing that expertise in the content. And so we got excited about it because really for us, this is a sort of very, very robust how to make sure that any student succeeds regardless of their backgrounds. I think that as we go through this, one of my top tips is always, if you think it's clear, give your assignment to someone outside of your discipline. Is it clear to someone outside of your discipline? Because it might very well be to someone else within your content area, but outside, if someone's asking you questions as a faculty member, then the students are absolutely going to have questions. And yeah.
And so it's coming from that place of understanding students as novices that really makes the tilt work incredibly important, especially from an equity standpoint. You know, if we view the language and expectations of our disciplines kind of like the fence you see in this image here, right? What we're trying to do is make sure that students have the resources and the preparation to eliminate the barrier as best they can, right? So sometimes that means, you know, helping them in different ways. Sometimes it might mean, you know, trying to replace the wooden fence here with you know, a mesh fence and let students see all the way through the process. But, you know, this really comes from a place of us getting excited about the opportunities that we had to help students in really specific and really concrete ways that could just make a difference in their success and empower them across disciplines and in their lives. So as we think about the assignments that you all give, one of the things that we'd like you to do here in the chat is to think about common questions that students ask about a specific assignment or about assignments in general, in terms of how they might succeed, right? So, and we ask this question every time we do this, right? So what common questions do students ask about how to succeed or get an A? And we really want you to think about a specific assignment, not just an A in the course, but what are the questions that they ask about assignments? And then just take a couple of seconds here. Yeah. All right, good. What's a thesis? How many pages? Yeah, so there we go. Right. We're getting into the nuts and bolts here. Yeah. So we want you to think about an assignment that that you give. We want you to think about these questions, and then over the course of our time together, we want you to think about how Tilt could resolve some of these questions and make sure that students are prepared to be successful in whatever that looks like in your assignment and in your course. So just kind of keep these questions in mind, and we're going to save the chat and kind of extract some of this to make some patterns later. But this matches up perfectly what we're seeing here with all of the other times that we've done this. And hopefully by the end, you'll see how this kind of circles back around. And so I'll throw it back to Marina.
Yeah. So, you know, whenever we set an assignment in any one of our courses, there's always a reason, right? We always have a purpose for that assignment that's very clear in our heads, whether it meets the learning objectives or whether it's going to help them in a future course. And I think that a lot of the time, if we're not communicating that clearly, one of the risks is students perceive it as busy work. Has anyone ever had students say, what's this all about? Why should I do this? Or not do it because they perceived it as busy work? And so what we've learned through working through this material is that there are a large number of things that relate to the purpose or the why do the assignment, that it's actually really important to communicate to those students. Again, as discipline experts, we can see exactly how working through that assignment is going to help them develop in the right way, but are we clearly communicating it? And so as we look at in specifically the purpose, that's something that we often have, but we don't communicate. That can address for the students, this is going to help you achieve this specific learning objective. That's a nice easy one because we usually have that pretty clear. But also maybe include for the students how it might help them progress through not only your course, but in a course following in a sequence, how it might help their overall achievement in college as a whole. And these are the two biggies that I think that people often don't think about including, and I know I certainly didn't, even though I had it up here, was how this is going to help them build skills for careers. Now, I'm at Dalton State College, and the vast number of our students coming in, as I think is true across a lot of the university system of Georgia, are looking for jobs. And so I think if you can relate why you're asking them to do this particular assignment relative to the skills they will need to succeed in their career and get a job in the long run, that's really going to be a hook for the students to really engage in your work. And then, of course, what we're trying to do is create global citizens. And so how it relates to their own lives or their place as global citizens is also something to consider in including. And so I think we always have a purpose, but we don't necessarily communicate that with the assignment to the students. So when we look at what makes an assignment transparent, purpose is absolutely that first criteria. And again, the Winkelmes project looked at a large number of different options. And so for us, it's nice and easy. And for as faculty developers, this was very exciting because it's a very simple way to modify assignments. It does not take very long. And yet there's a lot of evidence. It's a highly evidence-based technique. And we've all as a team seen the impact it can have on our students in a positive way as well. So purpose is that first thing that you can indicate in your assignment that will help the students see the relevance and actually engage with what you're asking them to do. Now, the second thing is task. And I think that's the thing we already rock at, right? Like we're pretty good at explaining what it is the students need to specifically do and what they need to know, like whether it's relevant to particular aspects of content in the course. But I think the last thing is something that can be quite difficult for us to think about, and that is actually providing criteria, how to get an A, lay it out. This is how you achieve success in this assignment, including and not limited to examples, right? A good response to something would look like this. You know, a less good response would look like this. And I think a lot of faculty struggle with this, and I can tell you that I did when I first explored this material. And then eventually I realized when we all go up for promotion and tenure, the very first thing that we do is clarify what's expected of us and ask for an example portfolio for someone who's been through promotion and tenure successfully. So I think if we're expecting that as professionals, then that's something that we need to afford the students as well. And so if you, the evidence has shown if you address those three things in your assignment design, the students are much more likely to succeed, and we will share some of that data with you later on. So based on these criteria, you can type in the chat, how transparent do you feel like your assignments are at the moment? It's a safe space. We're all friends here. Ah, excellent. We've got a poll.
Actually, I have a poll for that.
That's brilliant. Great. I love watching these move. Oh, that's interesting. Some people are typing in the poll and some are in the chat. I love it. Okay, so we've got a good balance. So for the most part, we feel like we're doing pretty well. Like I said, for most of us, I think we outlined the task very clearly. Maybe there's a little bit of work we can do. So we're going to take you through a process of how you would redesign the assignment that you had in mind coming into the webinar as we started today, and take you through an example of a pre and post design, and then let you work on your own assignment. And so I'm going to hand over to Rod.
All right, sorry about that. I lost my little controlling window to tell me that I could turn my mic back on. So what we have here, so I teach English, and this is not my example. This comes from a colleague, but who gave us permission to use it. So this is a typical sort of what I would have given actually to my students back in the day, certainly before I learned about Tilt and how important those facets of purpose and self-efficacy are in student understanding of why they're doing the work that you're asking them to do. And so what I'm going to ask of you here is just take a couple minutes to read over this example. And then we're going to go to a breakout room, and you'll have about 5 or 6 minutes in the breakout room to discuss where you think, or where you think you can find the purpose and the task and the criteria. So do we have a statement in this example of where the students know exactly why they're doing what they're doing and what the outcomes are for them? It's new knowledge and skills that they'll learn. And then the task, the sort of the step-by-step approach that they'll go through it. And then the criteria, how do they know they're being evaluated? How do they know that they're going to get an A or avoid a C, as a D, as some students might look for? So we'll take a couple minutes to review this, and then in about a minute's time, we'll put you over into the breakout rooms. All right, so everybody, I think we're back. We had a slight little hiccup in not being transparent for you about some expectations and rules. I did not specify because I didn't take a note, so that's completely on me, and I apologize to have taken a screenshot of this example and then to have discussed it. But there aren't a lot of words on the screen in this particular instance. So if you did talk about what you saw, were you able to what elements, or as you're looking at it now? Let's start with the purpose. What do we see as kind of the purpose that students know that they're going to sort of the knowledge or skills that they'll take away from doing this essay assignment? And you can put your responses in the chat, or if you'd like to be brave and volunteer to speak, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
I don't see a hand.
Oh, well, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I found it. Okay. So my remark would be that the objective is really, really unclear. What are the 4 major grammar errors? It should be in the assignment itself. Hopefully there's more of an objective than just that, but that alone isn't clear.
That's helpful. Thank you, Nicole. Anybody else?
I was concerned about what is the narrative mode. And I didn't quite get how the purpose and development features into it, like looking at it from a perspective of a student.
Thank you very much. And as I'm looking at some of the comments typed here, and that's the inclusion of student learning outcomes or course outcomes or learning outcomes aren't included here. And some folks kind of reject those because they're often put in academic ease. They're sort of written for programmatic use, but not necessarily for student use. And so having a translation of those for student-friendly language and sort of more inviting language so students understand those goals. We might be able to read that and understand it, but do students, especially those incoming students, and especially for students who might come from communities where they don't have people they can call upon in their family groups or the community groups to ask questions about, what does this guy really want from me? What's actually going on with this essay? And many of you point out to the to sort of like not being sure about the outcome here. Why are we doing the thing we're doing? Normally, we would tell our students this, right? We might give the assignment, and in class, especially face-to-face, here's your assignment, now let me go through it. Online, you don't have that benefit always. You might do so through a video, but I'm a big fan of the old saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So why not put it on this piece of paper as well as tell them in a video? That way you know that they're getting the information they need. We see, I think we're pretty clear about the task. Anybody unsure about what steps that students might need to go about? If you're a student, put yourself in mind of this. Do we see tasks covered clearly here? What could be improved upon? Go ahead, Nicole. Oh, you're still on mute. No, yeah. No worries.
It's super confusing because the directions talk about the minimum, not the maximum, et cetera, but actually lower down it talks about MLA formatting, which kind of implies that outside sources are used, no? So then it becomes even more confusing. What do they mean by MLA formatting? Be really clear. Do they mean simply the presentation of your name and the assignment, or do they mean citing? And so the instructions are really confusing to me. I mean, they're blocked by all these different things on the screen here, but they just seem really unclear.
And I've found with my own assignments that when I give these assignment sheets, but certainly before I learned Tilt, I would kind of highlight or put in colors or put in bold the things that I would see them doing most often that I viewed as like, you should know this already. And we're talking about 1101 students, and I don't know about your students, but oftentimes they're coming from school systems that haven't covered MLA, even though it's in the 12th grade expectations for high school in Georgia. They might not even know what those letters mean when you put them together. So it's assumed that it's part of the course, but having clarity for those students to be able to work through this so their cognitive load isn't taken up through trying to just decipher your instructions, that helps them to be able to turn that cognitive load towards the very demanding work of writing an essay. I see some excellent comments in here. So let's, I see someone mentioned rubric. So that's where we go then to the rubric. And this is criteria. Do I know how to avoid a D? Do I know what it takes to get an A based on what we're seeing here? I see Nicole's head is shaking. She's up on my screen right now, so that's why I see her. Yeah, no examples of rubric at all. It does reference the rubric, right? And so there's an assumed that the narrative rubric, it's the end of direction stage, but that's not really clear. And it's presumably you might include that rubric somewhere in the assignment documents, and not necessarily in D2L, not buried all the way into that assignment. Perhaps even give them a copy of that rubric up front so they can use that as a guide to work their way through to find out what you're expecting of them, even providing maybe some examples of excellence. Here's what to do to get an A, here's what to do to avoid a D. Not necessarily for them to copy, and that's what we have faculty often ask us, well, what if they just copy that? Well, you say, this is just a guide for you. Here's an opening paragraph of an A-level essay. So looking at this then, that question I'll sort of lead you into here as I hand it over to Jordan is, looking at all these things, there are opportunities for us to have made this thing more transparent. And if this were yours, what are some of those things? So rhetorical questions for you here. Jordan?
Yeah, so here, and we can take a minute and look at it. We see this is a part of the revised version, so we'll look at the first half of the revised version. And then in the chat, if you can, just notice, what are the ways that that the author made this assignment more transparent, especially thinking about purpose. Yeah, so I agree. I think the storytelling language is much more novice friendly. I think it explains, exactly why, makes that connection for an 1101 student really well. And so you can notice, you can jump in, either unmute yourself or put it in the chat, either what the author changed here or what else could be done, because these examples are not perfect by any means. And it looks like I see Nicole with her hand raised. Nicole, you can unmute yourself and jump in.
I actually didn't realize it was raised. However,
oh, no worries.
No, I actually have something. I don't understand. A specific local problem should be defined a little bit more, because it's a vague concept for students. When I have local problems, I'm specific. I give examples, some examples, such as, right?
Right, I totally agree. I think, mentioning maybe a few local problems, a few examples, modeling those examples could be really helpful here. One of the lines that kind of stood out to me about the revised version was the line about being able to tell a story about a problem can be one of the first steps in solving the problem. I really liked that to kind of explain the purpose of the assignment. And it looks like Karen's saying it helps connect to the students' lives in a more relevant way. David, yeah, there's more instructions. This is just the first half, all we could fit on this slide. So Frank brings up a great point, and this is one of the things we were talking about as we were prepping, is one of the things about teaching online, you could definitely hyperlink a lot of things here. So definitions of logos, ethos, and pathos. As Rod mentioned, maybe you've already talked to him on videos about this, and maybe it showed up in readings, but then the ability to have the direct links and direct access to those definitions is great. Yeah, I agree. Everybody loves a story. So I think, and Paul brings up the need to clarify a social problem. Completely agree. I think, to make this more transparent would be, explaining what a social problem is and offering some examples. All right, so we'll look at the second half of this assignment. So I'll give everybody a minute to read over and look, and we'll talk about the task and the criteria here. And then after you read it over, feel free to either unmute yourself or put your comments in the chat, either noticing how the assignment was changed or what else could be done to make it more transparent. So somebody mentioned a bulleted list would make it a lot easier, and I completely agree with that. So we've got, providing examples. I think that would definitely help. I also saw David mentioning the 400 to 750. So, then we've got, what the criteria for grade, what determines that? Is it, the length, or is it the content? And making that more clear. And, one of the things that is that you could also do is link, hyperlink to, Purdue OWL, or some other resources to give those examples. The original assignment, it looks like, was linked to the rubric or the narrative rubric, which would help. But I agree. I think having examples or a sample essay or, some sort of examples could definitely help here. Yeah, great. How many sources, or are there sources? And if that's the case, what kind of sources? And then I noticed Bruce had mentioned, is the story, the purpose of the story, is it meant to solve the problem? And I love Rod's comment here that student-centered language is helpful for students thinking about your audience here. And who the audience is. Oh yeah, Kim, I love that idea. Putting together an FAQ for the questions over major assignments. That's a great idea, because I would get a lot of the same questions, and I get used to answering the same questions. But an FAQ could really help. I love that idea. Another good idea, maybe narrowing the range. I think other people have pointed that out. That's a pretty big range on being almost double, 400 to 750. So it may make sense to kind of tighten that focus there. Rod, there's a request for you to jump in and explain your student-centered language comment.
Sorry about that. Yes, I have trouble finding that button apparently. So the student-friendly language or student-centered language might be, I was sort of responding to a couple of comments about where sort of the students, if they see a massive block of text, or an assignment sheet that has very detailed explanations, that might fall into the TLDR, too long, didn't read type of scenario. So thinking about your primary audience for this assignment, it's not your colleagues, it's not your chair who's going to review this potentially, it's really only but the students. So making sure that that language matches what the students can read, what not necessarily on an 8th grade level, because we know we're expecting more students than that, but we don't need to have them necessarily pulling out a thesaurus because we don't know what their language range is. Where I teach, for example, it's a pretty broad selection of students, so I can't assume that they might know what the word analysis means, and they often don't. And so I have to sort of explain that for them. So if I want them to do an analysis, I might provide a brief explanation, and I'll put that in language they're more likely to understand. And that helps them to be able to then, again, part of that cognitive bandwidth, right, is they're not having to process language that they're not familiar with that can get in the way of them understanding exactly what you're wanting for them for that assignment. Running it through students. I've done this in my classes as well. Say, here's my assignment sheet. It's supposed to be more transparent. What do you think? And of course, they're going to say, you could just avoid giving us essays, professor. And I can say, yeah, well, aside from that, what do you think about the language? And I've used their own feedback to help me write better assignments because they speak in their own language. And I'm, as I get sort of older and older, as my children remind me of, often I know that I'm sort of getting necessarily out of touch with some of the way they use their language, not necessarily slang, but trying to put it in language they understand.
Great, and I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Jesse for the next slide.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about these assignments, and these have been great comments that you all are making and things that you're picking up on, we can see the progress from the first version of the assignment to the second one, and somebody here in the chat mentioned continuous improvement with the FAQs. And I love that idea because that's really kind of what we're after. And so the longer you do this, what you start to understand is that, especially I noticed at the beginning of the session, quite a few folks are new to online teaching. I've been teaching online since 2011-ish, I think. So for a minute. And what I realized is that my online students had lots and lots of questions that would normally get asked in a classroom, either to me or to another student. And online sort of put a barrier up. And so when I started tilting assignments for those online courses, what I realized is that this started to match up with some of the work that I was doing with UDL, right? So if we think about the primary questions of tilt, which is, why, what, and how, right? That starts to resolve some of the questions. And it's better for very diverse learners who are coming at this from a bunch of different angles. The other thing I realized is that by tilting some of those assignments and trying to be more transparent, I was actually reducing anxiety for students. And that was not something that I expected initially. But if you all are in the USG, you know that we've done quite a bit of work recently around mindset. And these things tie in really nicely together because as we start to make assignments more transparent, more student-centered, somebody, I think it was Nicole, mentioned using you in the assignment as opposed to a student, right? Making it more personal, that starts to have an impact on student mindset and starts to help encourage their growth in really specific ways. So again, as you're thinking about this, it's not just a one-off strategy. This is an opportunity to connect to lots of other strategies that have very significant impacts on student learning and accessibility. All right, Jordan.
Thanks. Okay, so the next thing we will do is, we ask you to think of a specific assignment or have a specific assignment, and we actually have a rubric to look at how transparent your assignments are. And so we've got the 3 criteria: existent, emerging, transparent. And I believe Denise emailed these ahead of time, but she also just put the link in the chat. So you should be able to click on that link and open it up. So if you could take a minute and look at that, we're going to go ahead and put everyone into breakout groups. And so we're going to ask you to think about your own assignments in terms of this rubric, but then also just in the group, share, ways you could make this assignment more transparent. And then when you come back, we'll have you all kind of share out some of these ways or ways that you can make your assignments more transparent. So she just put the link again. Go ahead and open that link. Just take a minute to look over it, and then we'll send you all to breakout groups. All right, well, welcome back, and I'd like to have Jesse lead us in discussion of what we learned in that.
So think about your online assignment. Think about your breakout sessions here. Rod has posted a question for us based on this preliminary discussion. What areas stuck out for you that give opportunities for more transparency for your students? So, on a practical level, what could you modify to make it more transparent or even fully transparent? And then what we'd like to have you do is, if you have something you'd like to share, just raise your hand and we can call on you. Or, you all have done pretty well managing yourselves. So just feel free to jump in and share a little bit from your discussions with us.
Hey, this is Marla. Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. So my group had an amazing discussion. We focused on providing students with examples so that they can achieve the grade that they want. And someone brought up a really good idea, which was if they're worried about plagiarism, that you can just take sections of the assignment that made a good grade for whatever the student is struggling with. So maybe just an intro, a body paragraph, and a conclusion. And it could even be from your own work, especially if that's what you want students to strive for. If you write anything or are publishing anything, students need to be conversing, using academic language like that. And then something that I brought up that I still use to this day that I really love are just paragraph outlines. A professor gave it to me in undergrad years ago, and I still use it. It literally has the paragraph formatted in whatever style the professor is looking for. And it just said the first sentence was, "This is your topic sentence. It should introduce your readers to the idea that you are going to talk about in this paragraph." And then we'll talk about, stating your idea or analysis using at least 2 items or 2 sentences to support that analysis or idea, a concluding sentence, and then a transition sentence to introduce the next paragraph. And so that alone, even though it's just the basics, I mean, that is the basics of really good writing. So that is what we talked about.
Excellent. Thank you. So, one of the things that we sometimes hear is that folks are worried, Marla, you talked about the plagiarism aspect, but folks sometimes worry that this will somehow limit students' creativity in their responses. And what we found is that that's really not the case, that providing them exemplars give them opportunities to go above and beyond that. And sure, you'll have some students who are aiming for that sort of middle ground, maybe even the bottom rung of that ladder of success. But you have a lot of students who want to get to the top. And so anything we can give them as exemplars to help them make that climb just works a lot better for them. And I love the idea of giving students templates to work from. I do that a lot in my own teaching. Let's hear from somebody else here. Share an idea that you had about making your assignments more transparent, or the conversation that you had.
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
We talked a little bit about kind of being a little bit more laid back as instructors and wanting our students to be creative. So when it comes to that, how does that work, especially finding a balance between students who need more structure to be able to give them that structure, but also to be able to give students who like creativity the space to be more creative?
Yeah, so Aaron, I'm thinking about the response here, because I get where you're coming from, and I've had some of those students, but when I've tilted assignments, I've yet to encounter a student who couldn't take the assignment and make it their own in some specific way, right? Those sort of go-getter students. And I tend to be pretty flexible with my own assignments. My background is teaching English, everything from composition, through literature and creative writing. So there are ways that I've had students make assignments their own, but I find that it's easier to take structure away if I need to than to add it in later. And so, and there was a bit of conversation happening in the chat here about, what's too much, what's just enough. And I think that it's always going to be a balancing act, and that you'll kind of have to feel that out for yourself. But if you'll trust your students to give you feedback on that, they'll let you know when you've not provided enough, or in some cases, when you've provided too much. And I try to get that feedback from them at regular intervals, and just, to ask, say, how did that assignment work for you? What was clear? What was unclear? And then it goes back to that continuous improvement aspect again.
Okay.
Does that get to your question?
I think so, yes. I'm still learning, so thank you.
Me too. We've been doing this for a while, but every time we do a session like this, or every time I look at another assignment, I'm thinking of new ways to do things, and trying to push myself and my students forward a bit.
And
Thank you.
people have mentioned in the chat doing like a post-assignment evaluation or some sort of metacognitive reflection on an assignment. I've had some success with that, having students kind of reflect on an assignment.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the statistics surrounding the TILT movement. What are the benefits around transparency? And so one of the biggest pieces of research, or kind of a foundational piece of research, was Winkelmes's article in Peer Review in 2016. And it was based on this study that she did at UNLV. And the big takeaways with the study were increased academic sense of confidence, increased sense of belonging, but they also saw a huge increase in retention. So it was not just that grades increased, there was this real big increase in retention. Since then, there's been a lot of other replications of this study. I'm gonna put the link in the chat for this book. It's called Transparent Design in Higher Education, Teaching and Leadership. Mainly because California State, their system actually replicated this study in, I think, 2017 and worked with Winkelmes. And then Indiana, the state system did kind of a similar thing in Indiana in 2018, working with Winkelmes, and they saw very similar results. So one of the things that we like to say is that, tilting an assignment is one of the smallest things you can do that's going to have the greatest impact. But just by making your transparent assignment, or your assignments transparent, it has amazing impact. And I'll just mention one last thing. When they did this study, the faculty members only had to make 2 assignments transparent. But then, once they kind of learned the benefits of transparency, they wanted to make, even more than 2 transparent. All right.
So for this last little bit here, we want you to envision the future. We want you to think about making your courses fully transparent. Again, if you start with just 1 or 2 assignments, very quickly you can ramp up and build up an entire catalog of transparent assignments. And so just start thinking about little ways that you could incorporate this in your teaching. 1 assignment here, 1 assignment there, and don't feel like you have to go out and do it all at once. Because it really does start to snowball. Once you start seeing the outcomes, I know for me, it was a reduction in grading time. That was one of the best things about this for me personally. For my students, it was that their performance went up. They were just doing better work because I was being clearer on the front end. So start thinking about ways that you might pull this in, and have some happy tilting in your future.
Thanks, everyone. It is 12 o'clock, and so we promised to end on time, but I'm sure that at least a couple of us here can stick around maybe for a few minutes for questions. But one thing I wanted to mention is that all of the materials and a recording of this webinar will be available on our website. And I just put that link in the chat. I'll put it in there a couple more times because it's scrolling up, but it's the same place where you registered originally. And also tomorrow, in addition to those materials, I'll send you a evaluation form. So we would love your feedback on this so we can make it better. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up, but some of us can stick around for questions. And I think Marina even had a little something that she wanted to add.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the creativity because I was myself incredibly worried about limiting students' creativity because they're always more creative than I am, and I'm always, you know, when they're empowered to achieve on an assignment, I'm always, you know, really delighted about it. And so I actually had pulled an assignment that I wanted to go through this tilt procedure with, and I hadn't yet had time. And I was out for a week, and I had 2 lab sections doing the assignment, and one lab section just got given my explanation by the student TA. The other lab group actually had a student TA who had taken my class before, and had as well as going through giving them the handout, she said, here's my example, here's what I did. And she took them through it. And not only did that class not copy hers in any way, but greatly overachieve with that assignment, the other group just, I couldn't grade it. Like they hadn't been able to follow what I was looking for. And that same student TA is actually in this session today as a faculty member, which makes me incredibly proud. And so shout out to Brandy Rogers at Georgia Highlands College for being that person. I just told her today, I tell that story as we do this workshop, because I have not seen a limit in creativity, and it's something that I was very worried about myself. So kudos to Brandy there.
Excellent. If you guys have questions.
Oh, Carl raised his hand. You mind unmute?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is one of the things we discussed in our breakout session, and it's something that I've had a concern with. I'm really in favor of tilt and tilted the number of assignments, but the concern is that you make all these clarifications, and then you got this giant document that the students don't want to read. And so the question always comes, how do you balance giving them the appropriate information and ensuring that they actually receive it? And so, I have some tips and some ideas myself, but I was wondering what you all would have to say about that.
So I've seen some really cool stuff done with infographics or flowcharts. If you've got a graphic designer working with you, that might help with that. I haven't been able to do that, but I like that much more than even the bulleted list. It's even more clear. So that's one of those things. Or links to real world connections where you're not specifically listening, here, research this real world connection, add in a bit of that authentic research for them as well. So Jordan,
I have students grade sample assignments using my rubric in class. And students are far more harsh graders than I can ever be usually.
True.
But also if they use the rubric, that forces them to have looked at it before they start their own assignment, or we do peer review as part of a draft process. Or I'm contemplating having students write their own rubric for some assignments, like give them some categories and then they have to come up with what the standards are on that rubric.
I love all of those. And what I have found when I've had students create rubrics is that they, like you said, they make it so much harder than even I would. So it's a really fun exercise.
And I find when you explain why, so when you go through a sentence, you say, well, here's why this doesn't work on this like rhetorical level or whatever level, grammatically, argumentation, talking students through how you're thinking as you're grading, I think helps students to understand that you're not just sort of, well, everybody gets a B today because I'm just over it, or I haven't eaten And so everybody gets a D. If you're sort of guiding them through and then referring back to the rubric, that helps them understand that you're actually applying that rubric analytically, and you're doing so also objectively, especially if you have students who might think that you have some sort of bias. You're showing them it's really about the product compared to the rubric, not about you and me.
So Carl, going back to that question about how much is too much, one of the things that I've experimented with is having the assignment in its sort of full form, but then taking the various pieces out and placing them at different points in, I use a lot of checklists in our learning management system. So in D2L, everything's kind of navigated through a checklist. So as I'm introducing the module or the unit that we're working on, I would sort of front load the purpose there and then reinforce it again in the assignment, so that they're getting sort of multiple avenues to the material. So it's not just all thrown at them at once. I can say things like, when we get to the assignment, I can say, so remember last week we talked about this. Okay, now you're going to use this purpose to go forward, or you're going to do this task that we practiced last week on this particular assignment. And I do a lot of scaffolding with discussions that kind of build to the assignments. But you know, again, it's a balance. I don't know that I've gotten it right. I've probably gotten it wrong more often than right, because I tend to over explain, as I'm doing right now. So I'm going to stop.
Well, one of the things that I've attempted in my classes that works pretty well, particularly if you mentioned scaffolding, if I'm doing a particular assignment that's repeated throughout the semester, so with just different material, but the same sort of format. At the beginning of the semester, when we first encounter the assignment, I'll introduce them to the assignment, give them a tilted document that probably could be better, but part of the issue is we then go through and do the assignment in class together, and I explain, okay, this meets the criteria, this doesn't meet the criteria, and you do all of that. And so as they go to the second, third, fourth, fifth time they do the assignment, is obviously much clearer.
Kelly Wilson and her workplace health safety group.
But that goes out the window a little bit in the online environment, so I'm not sure how to approach that.
Well, so one of the things I do for online courses, I always have a synchronous Q&A session, and I try to scatter them throughout the week at different times. In fact, I have some mandatory meetings that tend to correspond with the larger assignments. But that's one strategy, and also putting up just an anonymous discussion post so that they can ask a question without fear of judgment. And a lot of times they're just really practical questions, like, I don't know what this word means. And those are the types of things that I try to carry forward into the next iteration of the assignment.
And sometimes it takes a brave student to come up to the professor and say, hey, I don't know a word. Right? That can, for a confident student, they might be able to do so. But in my classes, sometimes they're not so confident. They come from a school that's sort of not prepared them well, or they're coming from a home environment that isn't terribly supportive of higher education, whatever it might be. Or sometimes they're just shy and reticent. And so that's the students who are asking questions are the ones who are brave enough to ask them. Sometimes they over ask. I understand that. I have those students too. But what about those folks in the middle? Oftentimes the majority is like, you know what, I'll figure it out. And sometimes in figuring out, maybe they figure it out wrong.
Yeah, and actually some universities have flipped this on its head and started working with students. So the University of North Georgia is one of those that's actually been starting work on training students to look for these aspects of the assignment design, so that if they're missing, they can then perhaps feel more confident in asking those questions. And I think that's something that's a really potentially huge impact.
That's a really interesting approach.
I love that, because it speaks to that equity issue and the student who is really wondering if they belong in college. And if there's a question they have and no one else is asking it, they think, oh, everyone else must already know. And if I ask it, then everyone will know that I don't really belong here to start with. And so to me, that's one of the biggest arguments for tilt. It doesn't hurt the ones who have it, who don't have those questions, but it really helps those who are not sure if they belong there in the first place. And the research really shows that it does help with that sense of belonging.
Yeah, Denise, I was going to say that I sort of ran through that slide at the end, but the sense of belonging is, you know, that was one of the major gains that came out of the original study. You know, it's not even just in better grades. It was, you know, I can't remember the exact stat, but I want to say like retention in those classes went up to like 91% or something like that. But you know, it was, you know, they charted so high on sense of belonging.
And part of that research too, especially as you mentioned the book there, so I've got my own notes on it here, but that I'll hold it back further. So there it is. The Transparency, the Tilt book from Winkelmes and Co. That's the one. They talk more and more about how those that basically all students benefit from making transparent assignments more transparent. Every student benefits. It's not a cost of somebody else, but it benefits more those students who come from minority communities. They come from low-income households, and they come from first-generation families. And those students in particular, the ones that we see at our university, are the ones who are most prone to not going first to second year and so on. So why not help those? And also the other students who might have been fine without it. To me, it's always better. And the fact that it helps faculty by getting fewer questions potentially, and you're getting a better thing to grade, that's just a bonus. And maybe for some, that's the reason to do it. All right, well, whatever. But for me, it's really about what's in it for the students who are most at risk.
Yeah, Rod, and that's where like the Indiana one, because they worked with, I think it was called Ivy Tech, and then the Washington State Community College project. You saw the same stats showing up, you know, as the original Winkelmes in Nevada.
It's worth a read. And I'll say for those who are still online, it's and watching us, the first chapter is available through their website, through the Stylus website, so that you can just download it and read it. The first third of the book, if you read the first third already, you'll be much more confident in how you're tilting. If you go the second and third kind of get, second part's really more about faculty development and professional development. And the third part's more sort of structural and systemic and institutional. But that first third, it's a quick read, and you'll feel so much more confident in how you're tilting your assignments and the outcomes for your students, that when you're talking to your students about it, they'll believe you. And that's really important too, because if they think that you're, and they get the sense that you're passionate about their efficacy and their success, they're much more likely to follow you into something really difficult, like writing an essay, a lab report, and so on. You'll also find the full link to that text in the PowerPoint, the PDF version of the slides. We list that reference in there as well.
Oh, sorry.
Other questions, concerns, ideas?
All right, well, thanks everyone. We will send those resources by tomorrow, and it'll also be on our website. And just shoot us an email if you have other questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time today. Have a good afternoon.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.